What's the deal with how you're supposed to sleep while you're pregnant? And what scientific evidence is there to back it up? Welcome to the Deconta channel, where we discuss all things educational and we never duck away from difficult topics, including the safest positions for you to sleep in while you're pregnant. So where did this notion of needing to sleep a certain way during pregnancy come from anyways? It all started with trying to prevent stillbirth. That's when a baby dies inside the womb before birth, usually within the third trimester. And this horrific occurrence occurs to roughly 2.6 million babies globally each year. Researchers wanted to know why this was happening and how they could prevent it. The first correlation between how a mother sleeps and late stillbirth occurring came around from a study published in 2011 in Auckland. Since then, other researchers started following this idea, this concept, and started conducting research of their own. What they ended up finding, or what they suggest is the case, is that it's best to fall asleep on your side, either the left side or the right side, but the left side being preferred. From these studies, it was also suggested that after 28 weeks gestation, it's safest for you to fall asleep on your side because falling asleep on your back could double your risk of stillbirth. But notice that I am intentionally emphasizing the fact that these researchers stated falling asleep on your back is the problem, not waking up on your back in the middle of the night because you were already asleep and now your body rolled to your back to be more comfortable. That is not what they're suggesting. They're suggesting that when you fall asleep initially, that you fall asleep on your side, since that's typically the position we sleep longest in. But again, all of that's nice and fancy and all, if their research is actually valid to begin with. So let's delve into how they gathered the data and how they came to this conclusion of sleeping on your side, why they think this is the case. Well, for starters, many of these researchers gathered their data from women after they had lost their child. In other words, they were asking women who were traumatized, who had literally just held their dead, stillborn child, and were asking them how they were falling asleep for the last few months. You tell me, can you with certainty recall how you fell asleep a week ago, a month ago? How about if you were grieving the loss of your child from stillbirth? Do you feel like you could accurately recall how you fell asleep a week ago? Yeah, I didn't think so either. But why did they even think that back sleeping can cause stillbirth to begin with anyways? The hypothesis is that while you're on your back and you're pregnant, you have all this extra weight from the amniotic fluid, from your baby, from everything else going on in there, adding extra weight, pressing down on a major vein that brings back deoxygenated blood from your lower extremities back to your heart, called the inferior vena cava. So let's now consider this issue from an anatomical point of view, from the inferior vena cava's point of view, if you will. Even if you weren't pregnant and this major vein were to become blocked, it can cause a myriad of severe side effects. Some of them include hypotension, tachycardia, lower extremity edema, elevated liver enzymes, end organ failure, hypoxia, altered mental status, or you could even die if it was pinched off for too long and you couldn't bring the deoxygenated blood back up to your heart to become reoxygenated. Now, with all of that extra weight of being pregnant, or even being obese, being defined as having a BMI greater than 30, it is a plausible explanation that pinching off the inferior vena cava would have some serious and negative side effects for both you and your baby. But just how much pressure is required to pinch off or block off the inferior vena cava anyways? Who knows? The answer is actually who knows? There are no studies currently out there or made available for us to see how much pressure is actually required to pinch off or block that major vein. But we do know that when you're not pregnant, your uterus demands a blood flow of 60 milliliters per minute. Whereas when you are pregnant, your uterus now demands a blood flow of 600 milliliters per minute. That's a 10-fold increase. Because of this increased demand of the uterus for constant blood flow, the concern here is that even a mild disruption in the blood flow from the inferior vena cava would have serious negative consequences for both maternal and fetal side. However, if your body were to lose this circulation from your lower extremities back to the upper part of your body and to your heart, you would start feeling dizzy, your heart would start pounding. So really, wouldn't your body wake you up from sleep for the most part if that were to start happening? My hypothesis is yes, your body would likely wake you up because it obviously doesn't want to die. It's going to try and wake you up and basically make you switch positions so that you can increase blood flow again back throughout your entire body. So while I do find it a plausible explanation that pinching off the inferior vena cava between the front load extra weight of pregnancy and between the natural curve in your lower back of your spine, because that's where the vein actually lies, is right between that, as a reasonable explanation, my question is, how far would your body actually let that happen before correcting itself in some way, shape, or form by waking you up and making you move or anything like that? Would it actually let you stay asleep and let it get that far? I don't know. I also like to think about this topic in a historical point of view. Before the first mattresses came about and were made available all over the market in the late 1800s, how did our late ancestors fall asleep? What did they sleep on? Well, I mean, I would imagine they typically slept on something soft at hand, maybe some fur pelts stacked up on each other, or leaves, or twigs, or straw, all piled up. And I really can't imagine or fathom that all of our ancestors had to sleep on their sides in order to carry their babies to term and to make sure that the human race could continue, essentially. I simply don't accept that as a plausible explanation that sleeping on a pile of straw would be very comfortable sleeping on your side versus your back. I mean, it's already hard enough to do that on a comfy Tempur-Pedic mattress, to sleep on your side, that is. So I can't imagine doing that in a pile of leaves, even less so. So let's get back to the science, the actual published research here, and fast forward from 2011, where this whole thing started, to a study published by Dr. Silver in 2019. Now, Dr. Silver's study was actually published in the prestigious and very credible journal of the National Institute of Child Health and Development, or NIH for short. And this study concluded that up to the 30th week of pregnancy, there is not an increased risk for stillbirth or low pregnancy weight, or reduced size at birth, or high blood pressure disorders during pregnancy if you were to sleep on your back or your right side. But do keep in mind that Dr. Silver's research only concluded this up to 30 weeks gestation. So this research is only valid up to the 30th week. However, Dr. Silver's research has much more validity to it than the 2011 research studies did. This is because Dr. Silver's research used over 8,700 women who were asked throughout their pregnancies the positions that they were falling asleep in. In other words, they weren't asked after they had already lost their child and were grieving, trying to recall how they used to sleep months ago. A lot more valid in the moment. And not only that, but roughly 1/3 of those women from the study were also observed in active sleep studies during their pregnancy. So also a lot more validity to that research structure. So although the idea of sleeping on your side started out as an innocent suggestion with good intentions to prevent stillbirth, it has now become a panic and a pain point for many women who already struggle enough as it is to try and fall asleep with all the discomforts in pregnancy, let alone if they're also suffering from anxiety about it. Heavens forbid something actually does happen and they wake up on their back and they have the unfortunate issue of losing their child, and then you're going to somehow try and convince the mother that it wasn't somehow her fault? That's just simply too horrific of a thought to even try and imagine. And you might be saying, oh, it's not a big deal, just sleep on your side. It may seem like a very simple thing just to switch how you sleep and sleep on your side. But for many women, myself included, it's very difficult to sleep on your side when you're not used to it. And if you already suffer from shoulder, back, and neck pain, that can only exacerbate the situation and make those spasms and the muscles hurt and tense up so much more. This would also mean that forcing someone to sleep in a position they're not comfortable with through their own discomforts would make them sleep less and not as well. So then what is of more concern to me is that the lack of sleep or the disrupted sleep is going to cause more negative side effects than just trying to sleep on your side. The lack of sleep has been linked with depression, preeclampsia, which is a serious condition that can affect your blood pressure and kidneys while pregnant, lowered immune system, lower birth weight, and premature birth, and more. There's even evidence that suggests that women who chronically sleep less than 6 hours per night will end up being more likely to get a C-section and will more likely have to deal with longer labors. In other words, what started out as really good intentions to try and prevent stillbirths may actually be doing much more harm than it's doing good. So what is my personal conclusion on this whole sleep position matter during pregnancy? In my opinion, I would follow the most recent research available, the one published by Dr. Silver in 2019, that stated up until the 30 weeks of gestation, you shouldn't have to worry or think about how you fall asleep. However, once you reach around that 30-week gestation mark, that's where I would personally feel more comfortable trying to follow the sleep on side or SOS rule as defined by the American Pregnancy Association in order to relieve that pressure on your veins and to allow for better circulation. However, I can't stress this enough as somebody who already has been through it and had the anxiety of waking up on my back and nearly having a panic attack, thinking that I had potentially almost killed my child because, heavens forbid, I ended up rolling on my back in my sleep unawares. Don't panic about waking up on your back. Just try and fall asleep on your right or your left side, preferably with a wedge underneath your belly so you don't put pressure on your lower back, and some kind of pillow between your legs to keep your spine aligned correctly, and a nice pillow to make sure that it fits between your shoulder and your head so your neck doesn't kink sideways. And hopefully that'll also help if you struggle with muscle pains, neck pains, back pains, and all of that from sleeping on your side. Or if you happen to be fortunate enough to have one of those beds that can incline, definitely do that. Then you can still sleep on your back and just sleep at an incline, and you won't have to worry about it one way or the other. I mean, who really knows for sure? Perhaps pregnant women just have a harder time breathing when they're on their back and they're sleeping. And perhaps this difficulty breathing just develops into sleep apnea unawares. So maybe really the correlation we should be looking at is the difficulty breathing while pregnant or sleep apnea being correlated to stillbirths, in which case it wouldn't be the position you fell asleep in, albeit that could help with sleep apnea and breathing issues, but it would actually be the lack of acquiring oxygen for yourself and your baby while you're asleep that would be the underlying reason for concern. So I guess the overall answer, according to the most current research available, is to fall asleep as you find comfortable up until around the 30-week gestational mark. At that point, you should definitely try to follow more strictly the falling asleep on your right or left side. So other than being frustrated at what position I should fall asleep in while pregnant, which is probably a frustration point for you too if you're watching this video, what else has week 20 of pregnancy felt like? Well, for me, my anxiety has definitely lessened ever since last week when I had to run to the OB and do an emergency ultrasound check because I was in such an anxiety spiral in my head. And I think ever since seeing our little girl in there sucking her thumb and was totally okay, and then also purchasing a fetal Doppler for me to use at home when my head starts going through a tizzy like that really helped me bring down my anxiety this week. Unfortunately, I am still dealing with some massive hip pain right now, and it keeps switching from one hip to the other, and it basically makes my entire body shake from the pain. I could barely even make it up my own stairs the other night because I couldn't use my hip or put any weight on it. So what's our little hip punisher up to in there this week anyways? Well, by week 20, our baby is roughly 7.75 inches or roughly 19.7 centimeters that's about the size of a Belgian endive or a bell pepper as seen in the model here. Baby is also now fully covered from head to toe in a waxy white substance called the vernix caseosa, and that's going to protect their skin from the amniotic fluid that they're floating around in and also make them a little bit more lubricated to slip out of the birth canal during birth. It's also getting pretty poopy in there for your little one, in that they're producing their first meconium poopy. And meconium is like a black tarry substance that's made up of the cells that have sloughed off their body and been excreted into the amniotic fluid that they are swallowing. So essentially swallowing their own dead cells along with their own excretions and all of that. It's pretty nasty. And that builds up into that black tarry meconium. No wonder their first poops smell so awful when they come out. So if you were frustrated like me about how you're only supposed to sleep on your left side during pregnancy, I certainly hope that this video gave you some clarity with research backing the rationale for one way or the other, and to help you make an informed decision on how you can comfortably spend your nights during pregnancy. Do you struggle to sleep on your side like I do, making this whole only sleep on your left side thing nearly impossible? Please tell me I am not the only one by commenting below. These videos take quite a bit of time to make, but it would only cost you a second to like this video. To join me next week in this 40-week pregnancy series, all you have to do is subscribe. Thank you, and peaceful slumbers.